Hi, I'm Erin Lindsay King. Welcome to Alaska Filmmakers, a program dedicated to exploring the many talented individuals working in the Alaska film industry. This week we're stepping behind the camera with one of Alaska's veteran cinematographers. Skilled in both film and digital video production, his work can be seen in a variety of documentary, feature films, and commercials since the 1990s. His experiences have even taken him as far as the South Pole, where he accompanied the U.S. Antarctic program. Alaska Filmmakers is pleased to welcome Tom Pillifant. Thanks for joining us today.
It's nice to be here, Erin.
Now, I know you have kind of an interesting story as to how you found yourself in the film industry, so kind of walk us through your journey into the beginning of it.
Well, let's see, I grew up in Alaska and attended university outside and was proceeding to graduate school after my undergrad when I got an opportunity to go to work with the United States Antarctic project down at the South Pole. So I skipped grad school and I went to the South Pole, where essentially what I was doing was operating heavy equipment. But you know, what a cool thing! I got to go be at the bottom of the Earth, where it's actually all the time, because you're right where all the lines of longitude come together, and you can actually walk around the world for, you know, your morning exercise. And you know, did one season and then traveled for a bit, and then went back for a second season. And when I was down there, one of the principals with Monty Python, Michael Palin, had a BBC program called Around the World, and they traveled to around the world, the aptly named Around the World program. So they came to the South Pole, and they were there for about 10 days, and during that time I got to help them out, basically, just hauling gear and standing by, watching them do the production, and et cetera. And I sort of caught the bug at that point. There was another year or so that passed where I was just doing a lot of traveling and et cetera, and I returned to Alaska in 93, I think it was 93. And one of my ski buddies was editing over at a now defunct facility called the Videoplex, and they needed someone to help write and produce a series of basically, you know, tourist-oriented videos that were in production over there. So I actually went to work as a writer and producer for a few months, but as luck would have it, a big box showed up at the Videoplex, and inside that was, I think it was the first Avid nonlinear editing workstation to arrive in Alaska, and I signed the UPS slip and unboxed the thing, so plugged it in, and suddenly I was an editor, and just took off from there. Spent thousands of hours looking at other people's footage, you know, doing rough cuts and logging, and just getting familiar with the way people shot, and really got the bug to not be sitting in a dark room any longer.
But once you got your hands on a camera, that was the direction you
That
took
was
with
it. I mean, I still edit.
Yeah,
I still edit a lot, but you know, my preference, my love is to be out in the field shooting.
Now, I know one of the first shows that you worked on, as a cameraman at least, was Awesome Adventures, and you said that show taught you a lot about filmmaking. If
you're making a living as a cameraman in Alaska, you rely on a certain amount of luck. Productions come up from outside, the funding originates outside, the individuals who are principally in charge of it come from outside. Typically, the crewing that takes place with a lot of these productions, you know, it is budget driven. And if someone in, you know, Philadelphia or New York or LA or, you know, some other mid-range market somewhere has a production to bring to Alaska, they're going to bring known quantities. And it's, you know, I mean, it's as it should be. If I'm traveling outside, I'm going to take my camera assistant with me if I can afford it. But as, you know, cable programming and everything else expanded, you know, there's so many more outlets for media or for content. A lot of you know, lower budget programming started coming along that really the entire show was, you know, the producer would travel to a location, hire local talent, for local technical talent, and do the production there. In my case, with the show you're referring to, Awesome Adventures, I came to Alaska. They needed a cameraman. It just happened that I was actually working at a place that I was about to quit, but I got the phone call. I picked up the phone, and they were looking for a cameraman, and I kind of looked surreptitiously around, and I said, "You bet. Yeah, I can shoot that." And sure enough, they came up, they hired me, and it commenced a 3-year association with that program where we traveled all over the world. And we would have awesome adventures. We would go skiing in the Swiss Alps, we would go parasailing, we would go scuba diving, we would raft rivers and that kind of thing. It was my first real opportunity to kind of put what I had learned about what constituted good shooting and versus superfluous shooting. I think a lot of shooters that don't edit much, and I think this was much more common before everybody owned an editorial workstation and could edit their own stuff. You either were a shooter or you were an editor, because it was difficult to mix the two. You just didn't own an edit station in your house. Mm-hmm. They were big, bulky, and very expensive. But being able to graft my editorial experience onto shooting in the field made me a really efficient shooter, and it gave me an opportunity to think things through in terms of the overall story, and put that against the sort of limitations that were placed on the production by budget and by time, and to get things done in a really efficient manner.
So do you think it's important for every person behind the camera to have an understanding of the editing process?
I think it's important to have an understanding of it. I think it's also equally important, though, that a shooter not be handcuffed by it. I mean, frankly, a shooter really shouldn't care what the editor has to go through to find the nicest stuff. The cameraman he sees a good shot, he's got to get it. That really is the job. And if you're constrained because you're worried that the editor isn't going to be disposed to go through everything that you shot to find that one moment, I think that's a handicap.
Your experiences in Alaska, some of the local productions that you worked on, I know that you do a lot of local commercial work. Describe some of those experiences.
Well, in Alaska, to make a living as a cameraman, you do virtually anything that comes along. It would be really nice if I could, just work on high-end commercials as a director of photography. But those opportunities are actually pretty few and far between. I do get to direct photography on commercial work sometimes, which I really enjoy, because typically a higher end commercial will have a budget that will allow you to pull out the good lights, the good camera, the good crew, and all the mounts and all the fun things, and have a ball with it. So it's largely an academic exercise. You get to really everybody gets some experience with some good stuff. I've done everything on productions from from operate the camera under someone else's direction to I work a great deal as a camera assistant, and that will be on a lot of local commercials, but also on a lot of national stuff that comes up. We're not really shooting on tape much anymore. We're shooting primarily on storage cards. You have this is all with respect to video, because we're not shooting on film locally anymore, hardly at all. There's only a few people out there, and mostly they're enthusiasts that are still keeping their film cameras alive, and it's really great that they keep that alive, that they keep that going. With the turnover basically required and the level of they compromise on the quality level, I guess you could say. There are people who will argue that there is no compromise between HD video and film now, but frankly there is. On a high-end commercial back in the day, we would always shoot it on film, and that's when you had more of a kind of a traditional role as, you know, DP, operator, camera assistant, focus puller kind of thing. Now you've got some pretty powerful cameras, some pretty great cameras at pretty low price points, so a lot of DPs will own their own cameras and they'll do everything, you know, and it sort of thins out the labor pool actually.
One of the things between film and digital too, regardless of the technology that, you know, we've seen in the past 5 to 10 years, it's mainly about the story. It's about the story that you're telling, and it shouldn't so much be about whether this is shot in HD and what kind of cameras we were using. Is that how you feel as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the last major enthusiasms for shooting on 35 millimeter film, you know, justifying the price point of it is swiftly evaporating. And that's due to the fact that video camera manufacturers have now developed, you know, 35 millimeter imagers that will accept 35 millimeter optics. Because the one argument you could always make was that you could have a more controlled depth of field using 35 millimeter optics, and the only way to adapt that to video technology was through a cumbersome adapter that often would, you know, not function properly, cause problems in production. And so some guys were able to, you know, justify, well, we need a 35 millimeter film camera to do this job properly, to do the photography, to serve the story the way that we see it. And but as you say, that it really should never, you know, when you're shooting, it shouldn't be about the technology, although, you know, the technology itself is quite a lot of fun to play with. I will say that there's a certain romance involved with film. A lot of it is embedded in the process of shooting film. You know, that's sort of the classic old, you know, everybody ready, let's roll camera, call it, mark it, click, okay, settle, you know, action. You know, and you need all that with film. You're, you know, conserving your film stock. You're, you know, just you do it by the numbers. On the other hand, you know, there is something to be said for a digital approach where you have sort of unlimited, you know, storage capacity in your memory cards, and you just start rolling. Especially as regards documentary production, you know, digital from a practical standpoint is great. You know, tape has always been great from a practical standpoint, regardless of the image quality. You know, you weren't so terrified about missing moments. You know, you could just let the tape roll, and now you can just fill up memory cards and erase stuff that you don't want if you need to acquire more storage when you're out in the field.
Let's talk about your company, Tommy's Dog.
I started Tommy's Dog in 1996 after working for various companies, production companies locally, because I just saw an opportunity in the freelance market, you know, to start marketing myself and working as a shooter more than an editor, or just working on productions out in the field, whether it was as a camera assistant or technician, or as the, you know, director of photography, or, you know, just a camera operator. You know, the goal of the company itself is primarily to keep myself employed.
And has that work kept you mainly in Alaska, or is it taking you outside of Alaska?
I've traveled fairly, not incredibly extensively, but I've had gigs in, you know, Central America, Mexico, all over North America. Been to Japan, been to Europe with my work. It seems like once a year, maybe twice a year, I'll get a job that takes me outside.
I know that you're very passionate about documentary filmmaking, and one film in particular that you really stand behind is Disaster on K2.
Disaster on K2 was a Discovery Channel production that was produced by actually a man and wife team, Robert and Donna Campos. They are actually out of Miami, very, very talented production team. But they came to Alaska. Actually, they were one of, if not the first outfit to take advantage of the film incentive program that's in place up here. The film itself was done at, we shot a lot of the recreations and so forth up at Alyeska. There was huge snowfall up there, and there was some bare rock areas that we were able to use. We worked with Matt Sundy with The Ascending Path. His guide company actually worked he and his wife Heather worked as producers on it and brought on almost all local talent. The director of photography on that, David Delaria, he actually lives down in the Bay Area, but I worked with him closely on that. We shot for 7 or 8 days down there, and it was a challenging shoot because it was that kind of weather where it's right at the freezing point, but it's snowing, so keeping gear working in those conditions is pretty challenging. Keeping the lenses clear is pretty challenging, and then we had dozens of people that had to get into various positions and look like they were wrapped up in a rope line on the face of a Himalayan peak.
Well, I know in Alaska, I mean, you also mentioned this, that there's just so many subjects for documentary films in Alaska. So many people have unique stories to tell here. Is that one of the things that keeps you in Alaska working here?
Alaska is absolutely replete with interesting, fascinating characters, stories, and they're not all tales of bush survival or subsistence lifestyles out in the bush, although I've done plenty of shows about that too. I mean, right here in Anchorage, what the hell, I'm working on my boat right now. I've got a warehouse rented over in Spenard, and it's in this crazy little stitched together bungalow complex where everyone around me is, they're transient, they're passing through Anchorage on their way to Dutch Harbor to get on a processor. One guy's here. I really don't know their stories yet, and I would love to know them. These people are from, all over the place, and they're fascinated by the fact that I've brought my skiff into this place, and I'm working on it. They stop by all the time. And, one guy stopped by the other day and said, "Hey, I don't have any use for these," and he gave me a box of bullets. And I'm like, well, what happened? He goes, "Well, I had to pawn my gun." So now I've got his box of bullets. What am I gonna? I mean, there's a story right there.
How do you feel about all these opportunities that are coming up to Alaska in the film industry, and how do you think the best way is to go about someone like yourself or someone just beginning out in the field to really take advantage of what's happening in the industry in Alaska?
Well, I think first and foremost, people have to stay tuned into the opportunities that are out there. A great way to get experience is working with local producers and shooters and that kind of thing to get experience as a grip, as an electrician, as anything else. I mean, I think it is a great opportunity to the fact that they just shot that one large feature up here. I know quite a number of people that worked in the grip and electrical department that stayed employed for 12 weeks. That's unheard of.
All right, well, thanks for chatting with us today, and good luck with all of your future projects. That's all the time we have for this episode of Alaska Filmmakers. We'd like to thank our host, Out North Theater, and Tom Pillifant for stopping by to talk with us today. If you'd like to learn more about Tom and his experiences working in production, you can find his links and contact information on our website, www.alaskafilmmakers.com. Thank you for joining us, and remember, everyone has a story to tell.